Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 4 of my Pregnant Hag podcast. I have a very special guest for you today. It is Byron Ballard over in Northern Carolina in the US. We're going to have a fascinating conversation, I am sure. So I would like to start first and say hello Byron. Thank you for finding the time in your schedule to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and welcome to my kitchen.
Yeah, it's lovely to see it behind you. And I believe you're drinking PG Tips tea in honor of
I am. I love PG Tips.
We're building a bridge across the Atlantic, right?
Well, with a name like Ballard, it's pretty obvious that at least half my family is English, and the other half is Irish and Scottish. So there we go.
Exactly. Like what's in the name? It tells us quite a lot. So while you drink your tea, I'll just read out your bio to give people, because not everyone in my audience may be familiar with your work. So let's do that. So Byron Ballard is a native of Western North Carolina, so that's in the US. She's a teacher, a folklorist, and an award-winning writer. She has served as a featured speaker and teacher at a number of conferences and festivals. She serves as a senior priestess and co-founder of the Mother Grove Goddess Temple in Asheville, NC. She podcasts about the Appalachian Folkways on Wyrd Mountain Gals. Her essays are featured in several anthologies, and she writes a regular column for SageWoman Magazine. And then there is a list of many books. I'll just give the titles. So the titles of her books so far, and she's still writing, are Staubs and Ditchwater, Asfidity and Mad-Stones, Embracing Willendorf, Earthworks, Ceremonies in Tower Time, Roots, Branches and Spirits, the Folkways and Witchery of Appalachia, and Seasons of a Magical Life, a Pagan Path of Living. And upcoming is The Ragged Wound, Tending the Soul of Appalachia, and Porch Food, a cookbook from Wyrd Mountain. And also, you're working on a musical adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Byron, do you ever sleep?
Yes, I sleep very well, actually. I'm a big proponent of getting at least 8 hours of sleep.
Excellent.
But right now, it's fun because I'm not actively gardening or farming. So it's that feels like a vacation. I didn't go out at 7 o'clock this morning and starting weeding. So I'm good. I'm good.
Very good. Yeah, but that's wonderful to lead that seasonal life, and that there are different seasons for different things, and that is the way to live, isn't it? So yeah, because your work first came to my attention probably during the lockdowns, because you wrote a prayer for the dead, and in a moment I'm going to ask you to please read that out to us, because it's so lovely to have that on record in your own voice. And soon after that, your editor contacted me about writing an endorsement for your book, Seasons of a Magical Life, a Pagan Path of Living. So I've got that right here. Your publisher kindly sent me a copy, and I very much enjoyed reading it, so I recommend it to everyone who is watching the podcast. So it's like diving in at the deep end, Byron, but would you be so kind to read out the prayer for the dead to us? Because, you know, a lot of people were using that. I shared it with my various groups of students. It was doing the rounds on social media, on Facebook. And I think it's utterly beautiful. So shall we jump in at that end? Would you mind?
Oh, thank you. So shall we start there?
Yeah.
The prayer is in my book, Earthworks.
Okay.
And that came out in 2018. And perhaps later we could talk a little bit about my concept of tower time. Because that's
a list of questions. It's one of my questions. What is tower time?
Because that's what this book is all about.
Okay.
So
what's coming?
I invite all the people here to take a nice deep breath, to perhaps ground and maybe even close your eyes. You have come to the end of this pathway in a journey to which we bear witness. You have come to the end of a pathway that is barred with a gate and a door. May this door open swiftly and silently. May this gate give you a moment's grace in which to rest your spirit before you venture through. We stand here with you as your companions, as your family, for you are beloved. But for now, we must remain here. We cannot go with you to this old land, not yet. For you will see the ancestors. You will see the beloved dead. You will walk among the divine beings that guide and nurture us all. You go to dwell in the lands of summer and of apples, where we dance forever youthful, forever free. We can hear the music in the mist, the drums that echo our sad hearts. We can see your bright eyes and your smile. And so we open the gate. We push back the door. We hold the gate open. We glance through the doorway, and with love and grief and wonder, we watch you walk through. Hail the traveler. All those remembered in love, in honor, live on. Farewell, O best loved, O fairest, farewell.
I think that's utterly beautiful, and I think it's lovely to hear that in your own voice, because I've only seen it on a piece of paper before, because I printed it off and shared it with people. So I know it's a kind of deep start to the podcast, but I think it's a beautiful start. So I have some questions for you. One is that you're based in the Appalachian Mountains in the US, and you have a small forest farm. And among other things, you call yourself a root worker. Now, I know what that is, but I think that not everyone in my audience knows what that is. Could you tell us about that, please, what that means?
Well, they say about us that we are nations that are separated by a common language. So, yeah, I relish the chance to talk about what all that means. One of the things I call myself, as you pointed out, I call myself a yarb woman, an herb doctor, a cove doctor, and a root worker. And all of those are old ways of expressing what in modern parlance we would call different styles of witchery. But I come from a culture that is based out of primarily Protestant Christian ethics. That's who many of the settlers in this area were. And because of that, the word witch is problematical. And though I call myself the village witch because I actually function as that, I do baby blessings and house clearings and funerals, obviously, and weddings and all sorts of saintings, blessings. But I can do that because I am in a city and I am fairly well protected. But something that all of us would do well to remember is that the word witch, which many of us feel we have reclaimed in the last 30 or 40 years, is still incredibly problematic in traditional cultures. And so if you come in with your confidence and arrogance or whatever in a very traditional setting, and you use that word witch, people will tend to pull away from you and to not be very communicative, because in their parlance, that word means someone who does bad things, who does wicked things, who curses, who causes the cows to stop giving milk and the chickens to lay eggs. So I think to be clear about what we mean when we say certain words is really important. But sometimes we just have to code switch and not use that word. So we have a lot of people from Mexico and Central America in this area. And to use the word witch, or in Spanish, bruja, is to label yourself something that people are afraid of and don't want to be around. Now, you may choose to do that for whatever reason. But if you want to integrate and learn, and if you are curious about other cultures, it sometimes is helpful for us to switch the language that we use so that we are safe to converse with. We are safe to be in the presence of. That's really important. So a root worker is someone who works with herbs and plants, not just roots, but with all sorts of plants in order to affect healing. And it's also energy work, but we don't usually talk about that. We just say it's root work. So you take a tincture of this root, or you do an infusion of these leaves, and it's an old practice, and every culture has that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I find it interesting because, spiritually speaking, it's also going to the roots of things. There's a very strong ancestral component to that work, isn't there?
Yes.
On the land where, you know, the ancestors of ourselves or the land have farmed, and, you know, the traditions and the knowledge around that. So it's root work in a spiritual sense as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Metaphorically and literally, it is root work.
I think that's beautiful. That's lovely to hear. So the next question is, what is Tower time?
Oh, hang on. Let me get my soapbox. Sometime in the late 1990s, and I love being able to talk to an audience that won't immediately think I'm mad as a hatter, but in the late 1990s, I started having literal visions, waking visions that were based on the tarot card, number 16, the Tower. I've been reading cards since I was 12, and I started with regular playing cards, and then had access to some tarot. So I've been reading tarot probably since I was 14, which is almost 52 years. And so those images are very personal to me, and very accessible. So the visions I was having were that we were living in a time when these top-down systems that we have had in place for literally thousands of years, systems that I refer to as patriarchy, though there are many other names for that, but that these systems were once again in a process of imploding. And we've had it happen historically many times. The problem with one of the many seductive problems with hierarchy and patriarchy and the top-down model is that it doesn't serve really anyone, but it's an easy system to set up. And it's so easy for us, and we've done it time and again. An example I often give is the 18th century, when we were seeing revolutions all across Europe. We were in this age of so-called enlightenment, and there was a chance then to really change what we were doing. And what came out of that was the governmental system that we have here in this country, that doesn't have a central authority figure per se, because theoretically the president here is equal to all the other branches of government and to everyone in the country. The problem is, once you start to structure something that is shaped like this, it's so easy to put all of the hope and fear and blame on whatever is on the top of that system, even though the system itself, it doesn't serve anyone on the bottom, which is the group of people who sustain the system. But it also doesn't serve the people on the top of the system. So for us, we think about white male privilege, and that at the top of that theoretical tower is almost always a privileged white man. It doesn't serve that person either. It doesn't serve anyone, but it's such a stable structure. And we know that because pyramids have lasted for how long? They last a long time. The structure is stable. So my visions were about that this was a time when we had a chance to change it to something else. So instead of just reconstructing what we have always known, and that's really the issue, isn't it? We will always bear the ills we have rather than to fly to others that we know not of. Hamlet tells us that. It just makes it so much easier to go, well, it's not the system, it's that guy. it's that guy on top of the system. And once we replace that evil, malevolent, whatever overlord, and we put in place the nice guy, it's all going to be fine. It's not going to be fine because it's systems. And we're seeing those systems collapsing now. So that's what Tower Time is about. It is about systems that have been in place for a long, long time that are collapsing. Now they are recalibrating within the collapse, which is why right now we see so much fascism all over the world, because they are grasping for what little bits of power can still be maintained. But I think that if we as conscious human beings can figure out the next set of systems and put them in place now, because the problem is once everything collapses, then we panic and we go right back to the same safe place. They say that about children, that abused children will go back to the abusive parent because it's something they're familiar with. And there's a certain amount of comfort there. So there's a concept in the book called Circles on the Ground, which is about creating these systems within systems that are based right in your neighborhood, relocalizing everything you can relocalize. Because as things collapse, and we've been seeing this in this country, and certainly I think in a lot of places with this supply chain problem we're hearing about, is where are we going to get our toilet paper? Well, does someone manufacture toilet paper within driving distance of you? No, somebody manufactures my toilet paper in Canada. So I'm not going to drive to Canada, but to relocalize everything you possibly can. And a phrase I've been using a lot as we are grieving is to grieve globally and act locally.
Well,
so that beautiful. if you are hurting for small children in whatever part of the world that you have no access to and no way to have agency in, bring that grief home and work actively in your community. Because I promise you, there are children in your community that need you. There are hungry people in your community too.
Exactly. So grief can be a force for change, right? It can be a force for change. It can help us to act. And you're so right about bringing it home, because it's so easy, because we live in a global village, so we see all of these things on TV, but we sometimes forget that is that the macrocosmos and the microcosmos, that which exists like outside us and far away on the other side of the world, will surely exist, maybe in a slightly different form near us also. And I thank you for issuing that reminder that rather than thinking of places you cannot go, sort of work with the people and the community and the places around you. That makes so much sense.
Another thing that I encourage people to do is to pick 3 things that they want to focus on. We are so overwhelmed with so much that is wrong or barely fixable. If only we could focus on all those things. And the example I use when I'm teaching is when I was a child, they had these things called Bobo dolls. And Bobo dolls are inflated plastic cones that are weighted on the bottom. And on the front was painted a clown. And the point was you were supposed to punch the Bobo doll and then it would come back up and you could punch it again. So yes, in the 60s, we were encouraging children to punch clowns and to continue doing that. But the point of it is that we are in that place now. We think we have solved something. We think we have solved, people aren't putting pollution into rivers anymore, are they? What a terrible thing. Well, yes, we are still polluting rivers. So if you pick 3 things and you live on faith that the things you didn't pick as your primary foci, somebody else will do them. You have to live on that faith. And it's those things that when they come across your social media feed, you go, no. I will not put up with this a moment longer. and hold those things to you. Maybe once a year on your birthday, you think, well, are those the 3 things I want to still work on? But so you're not locked into only doing 3 things. And you're not locked into not helping other people that you know who are working on other things.
Of course.
But it helps you to focus your love and your attention and your energy on places where you can make a real difference, rather than burning yourself out, being worried and concerned about all the things there are to be worried and concerned about.
Yeah, and then sort of drowning in the overwhelm of that. I think it's very good because it shifts the focus from all the things I cannot do to like, what can I do? And this is a question I've been asking myself a lot during the lockdowns. Of course, I personally cannot change the world, but there are like areas where I'm either in the right location, or maybe I have the knowledge, the work experience, the expertise, whatever it may be. But I've really had to sit down and have a conversation with myself, like, what are the causes closest to my heart, and where at this point can I make some kind of difference, you know, however small.
Yeah.
So, and for me, that is with, you know, this spiritual toolkit work with children. That's like one of my projects where I think, you know, here now in the, either during the pandemic or, you know, the aftermath of the pandemic, we'll see how it turns out. You know, that's one area where I think I have some skills to share. So I'm doing that. But also many things that I admit I'm not doing, because like you say, we can't do them all.
No, you can't. And you can certainly pray if you are a theist and you pray. You can certainly pray that this issue, which is not your issue, will be seen and addressed by people of good spirit. And you can light candles. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we as a community do to express our concern and our love. But if you pick 1 or 2 or 3 things, you can make a real change in your community. You can change the way things happen in the world around you. And if everyone did that, if everyone took on that passionate project in their community, then every community would change. And then we would be not only circles on the ground, but we would be interlocking circles on the ground, and we would become like chain mail, which is much stronger. It's much stronger than one particular link. And then we can start to really change the world. One neighborhood, one community, one village, one city, one state, one borough at a time.
One chain in the link. And I love it that in English the word mail also relates to like receiving things in the post and communicating with people, you know. It's like chain mail, but it's also like, you know, like we're all, even during lockdowns, we could communicate with each other through like internet and social media. So it's kind of like the word you can really play with, because it has so many meanings in English. And I just love that, like another little dimension to the concept. And also, I
also think it's important for us, and if we've learned nothing else in this past 2 years, it's important for us to remember that the expression of grief is also sacred.
Yeah, I mean, tears are sacred.
They are very sacred.
And we forget that sometimes, because our society is so uncomfortable with that. We want it hidden from view. We don't want to be exposed to it. We tell people to pull themselves together. But actually, like, what we're stopping is the flow of sacred tears. And those rivers of tears need to flow. They're part of like changing the landscape. So,
and it's, I have found in doing funeral rites that it's also important for us to grieve collectively together in community. It's very important for that. So that when someone comes to me and they go, oh, I just want to do a celebration of life where everybody is happy. And I just think to myself, okay, we can do that. But in addition to that, I'm going to have a bagpiper right outside, and I'm going to read a prayer that is going to wrench everybody's guts. And then the piper is going to start, and we are going to have the opportunity to grieve together because we need that. And it's not for the deceased. The grieving is for us as a community. We have to know that it's okay, and that healing can come out of that hard, tragic place. And sometimes it's the only place healing can come from.
Exactly, but that's how I see the sacred river of grief. I see it as this river that ultimately fertilizes and brings blessings, and it flows back to the community. That's like how I see it. So
just like the Nile.
Like the Nile, or like any world river, or like the Ganges,
Yeah.
Mention any river, but it has those sort of, life-giving properties. So, and I think to be given permission to grieve and to be given permission to cry, and people actually being comfortable doing that together, I very much hope that that's one of the things you take away from the pandemic collectively, that has become, because it's been so emphasized and so needed, that it becomes a more accepted part of collective life, of community life.
Yes, and understanding that grief is a process.
Yeah.
It's not something that strikes you like an arrow to the heart, and then you remove the arrow and it's okay. I joke about the Victorians all the time. The Victorians were good at not a whole lot of things. They were good at empire. They were good at bustles. They were good at oppressing people. But here's what they were actually really good at. They were good at mourning. So that if you had a significant loss, you mourned for an entire year. And you wore appropriate garments for that, not to remind you that you were mourning, because you didn't have to have that reminder, but to remind the people around you and your community that you were still in a grief cycle and should be treated differently than you would be otherwise. And then after a year, sometimes then people went into light mourning, which was mauve and other sort of purpley dark colors. And I'm not suggesting we all get beautiful Victorian clothes to wear when our mommies die, but to know that it takes a long time, and some things you will never get over. A colleague of mine's mother just died a couple of weeks ago, and I saw him last Tuesday for the first time since then. And I hugged him and held him, and I said, I want to remind you that this is something you'll never get over. You'll carry this with you, and it will change, and in some ways it will soften. But 20 years from now, he's going to feel that stab of, oh, I'm going to tell my mom about, but he won't be able to do that in the way we are used to. He won't be able to pick up the phone and say, Mom, guess what? But we still can communicate. That's what the whole point of ancestor veneration is that we keep those lines of communication open.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, grief is very much like a companion. I remember when my father died, I literally saw grief as a lady dressed in grey, and she was this companion that was with me for a very long time. And I would have dialogue to her. I'd talk to her, why are you here? How am I to get used to your company? And that was quite an experience, because I hadn't realized that grief could take a personification like that. It could take a shape like that. But it was also really helpful. It was like having my own grief teacher with me that I could speak to as I was working my way through the aftermath of my father's death and organizing the funeral and all of those things. So,
well, that's beautiful. How long did your companion stay with you? And does she come back periodically?
I glimpse her sometimes. It depends on what else goes on in my life. But she was with me constantly for about 3 to 4 months. And after that, it became more sporadic. But my father died in early June, and I think she was with me into September, October, into the autumn. But it was also deeply reassuring, and she was a beautiful presence, and she was compassionate, and she was available. So there was an incredible sense of being held while working through an unexpected death and a really big shock. So, and it was unexpected. I would never have imagined it would be like that, but that's how it played out in my life.
We like to think about death that it's something that takes a while, and you have time to process that this person is going to be gone, or that you yourself are going to be gone. But sometimes it happens like it did with you and with your dad, that it just, one minute they were alive and the next minute they were not. And yeah, and then you're processing not only the grief but the shock of it all.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that is a separate thing, because like in the moment, you work for the stages of grief, so there's like disbelief, this shouldn't have happened, why him, and like not other people. Like you go through all of these stages, but once you have processed the shock, you start seeing it in a larger sort of framework. And I think my father was a very outdoorsy man who had an absolute horror of being incapacitated or old age in its more sort of severe forms. So I actually later, this was after the shock had been processed, and as my mother is still proceeding into much older age, she and I, my mother and I, often say, well, we can kind of understand that he checked out earlier because he didn't have the personality to deal with that. It's almost like he made the choice that it was time and he was going to go, and he wasn't signing up for that trajectory, if that makes sense. At least that's what my mother and I will say to each other, that, and he would have found it very, very hard to deal with the challenges my mother faces now in her kind of mid-80s.
Yeah, I can see that. And for you, he will always be whatever that age was when he was still virile and able to do what he liked to do and happy.
Yeah, he was 70. He was 70 when he died. So, yeah.
Which used to seem old, but now that I'm almost 66, 70 seems like young.
No,
what a baby.
No, like I'm 54 and I always thought that, oh yeah, people retire at age 60 and 60 is old. And now I think, 60, like what? That's my next train stop. 60 isn't old, It kind of like shifts as we shift, doesn't it?
It does. It does. They say that age is just a number, but I think if you are in relatively good health, then age isn't a number at all. Age is it's just where you are, and you do the work that you are to do. I've had several people recently say, oh, you must be retired. And I go, well, I'm a writer and a village witch, which means that I never will retire. I'll just keep doing it until I can't do it anymore. Yeah. I look, well, but you're 65, you should be retired. Because I don't work a 9-to-5 job. Yeah. Oh, well, you must be retired. But no. No. Some jobs you don't retire from.
No, that's how I see my life. I'm not planning to retire. I think I'll probably reach a point where I may cram less of it in, where I allow myself more spaces between the various commitments and things, and that I could look forward to. But I just don't think I'm the person to stop doing it altogether. Also, I'm not sure what that would do to me. I don't think I'd be a better and more alive person if I stopped doing what I'm here to do. So, it's not a good idea from that point of view either.
I'm on the road a lot. In fact, I start my festival season in about 5 weeks with a trip to Florida. And I love to travel. I always have loved to travel, but I also love my garden. And so to plant all the broccoli and the cabbages and all of that, and then just disappear for 3 or 4 weeks, it kind of tugs at me.
Yeah.
But it also then is a lovely surprise when I come back and look, I can pick broccoli. That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, that is wonderful. But for me, my father never wanted to travel because he was a big gardener. He was a farmer's son, and he had more than a garden. He had a piece of land where he was growing the vegetables for the entire village, and he kept animals, and So for him, traveling, he didn't really like doing it because he didn't like being away from home. But he also felt that you were always like leaving something that you had started tending and that you had coached into being and growing. And for him to then sort of, move away from it just when it most needs your care or you most want to enjoy the fruits of it, that didn't make sense to him. So for him, the whole idea of always traveling and being on the move made no sense to him at all. For him, the joy of life was in being right there and seeing every flower and seeing the little baby animals grow up and, eating the vegetables as soon as they were ready to eat. That was his way of life. That's what he most loved doing in the whole world, and watching the birds and all of those things.
Yeah. Well, talk about deep roots. We had mentioned roots earlier. He obviously had very deep roots where he was. Yeah. And you don't easily pull roots like that up, not for something trivial. I mean, if you have a farm, and I have a forest farm, which the mushrooms and ginseng don't mind if I'm gone. But at the point where I've got chickens and goats and all of that, you really just, you can't leave them.
No.
Unless you've got a very good farm manager that can do the work. But even then, you would be worrying the whole time.
Yeah,
I think you would. I don't even have pets at this point. My last cat died about 4 years ago, and I have not replaced those animals because I'm on the road. It's not fair to them.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we need to be realistic about that. Yeah.
It would be very comforting to me, but it's not about me, is it?
Well, I mean, you're exactly right. You need to also look at what it's like for the other person or the other being. You know, being that an animal or like anything we're in a relationship with. I mean, we need to sort of look at, you know, we can't just take from things. It's also like, we are to be in a relationship, what is the give and take? You know, like, what does that other being need from me? You know, no matter if it's a human being or a land being or an animal being or an ancestral being or a spirit being, but it's about being in a proper balanced relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, and I talk about that in the book that you were so kind to endorse.
Yes.
As that relationship. Thank you. Oh, you're very good. Relationship has become a word that it almost has too many meanings. So I wanted to find a different way to describe what that is, and I came up with an acknowledged kinship. That we are related to all of these beings that you just mentioned. Deeply related, deeply connected to them. And all that is required of us is to acknowledge that. Is to say, oh yeah, why yes, I am sister to all these honeybees. Yes, I am. I am sister to the soil. I am mother to these brassicas that are coming up. And once we get to that place, there is a healing that happens not only within us, but there's a healing that happens in the biosphere, when we are not separate and alone as the intelligent ones or the ones with souls, but when we have a truly animistic viewpoint about the world and the world with which we live, then so many things change for the better.
Absolutely, because that was actually another question I had on. I'm just checking my list here, but you have arrived there naturally. Because in this book, one of the things that I really picked up from that book is that you write about the right relationship, our right relationship with the natural and sacred world. So I think that you have just answered. We don't need to repeat that. But another concept that I was struck with in your book, because this is like on my mind a lot when I work with families and young people and teachers and stuff, and the shamanic practitioners I've trained, is like, where you ask in the book, where are the councils of elders we need so badly for interfaith dialogues on the issue of treating our planet like holy ground? For me, that's one of the key questions of our time.
And those elders are here. I mean, we are two of those elders. And yet so much of Western culture is focused on the young and on making sure the young get a good start, because they are the hope of the next generation. Well, there is still plenty of hope to be had in the current generations, but we have to figure out how we communicate that. I was delighted to hear that your podcast is the Pregnant Hag. I love the word hag. In fact, I'm writing about that for another thing that I'm doing. We understand, in that thing, that our received wisdom is that a hag is a very old and ugly woman, and she probably lives alone and she probably smells bad. That's what a hag is. But we only have to take 2 steps back to see the root of that word. And the root is all about wisdom. It's all about, it is about a lifetime of received wisdom that is not only held, but is now ready to come forth. Like a spring. So when you say pregnant hag, yes, we are pregnant. We crones are pregnant with years and years of not only lived experience, but the wisdom of seeing how something was done 40 years ago and going, Okay, well, you can try that if you want to, but we tried it 40 years ago. These were the results we got.
Yeah.
So if you want to avoid it and try a whole different tack, that would be great. But if you insist on doing the way we did it, that failed, then these are the places where we failed. I was hopeful that this generational grouping would be the one that would break this stupid generation gap, that we would be the ones who would listen to elders and listen to youngers and all the way through, so that, because wisdom is wisdom and it comes through a lot of places and to a lot of people. But I think social media has made us, would like to make us separate and would like to make us enemies. That, oh, you know how those boomers are. Oh, you know how those millennials are. Well, I see millennials as people who work really hard. My daughter's a millennial. She works hard.
Yeah.
She thinks hard. She loves hard. She's not a slacker.
No.
And I think she would say about me, yeah, I know how boomers are. They're out growing organic food and sharing eggs with neighbors, and that's how boomers are. So it's so easy for us to pigeonhole people and go, oh, I don't have to think about you anymore because you're that thing. When really, one-on-one, it's very different.
It's true. Like my 17-year-old son made a very funny comment about boomers just a few weeks ago. He said these days boomers often have boomerangs. And what he means by that is their children move home again and they live in larger, like extended family situations. I thought it was hilarious. It was a really
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. But you know, that's the way families used to always be.
Yeah.
And it was a big
the boomerang model. There is something in it.
Many generations.
But also, you know, I think that, you know, young people have a wisdom of their own, because my eldest son, I was working at my desk this morning. My eldest son is 22 and he just walked in to ask advice about something, just something he wanted to talk through. And then I answered him, but then I just realized I'm talking to a 54-year-old person. And I said to him, you know, you actually live in a different world. Like everything that was so rock solid when I was his age, that world isn't there anymore. The world has shifted. So I sort of said, I can sort of tell you what it was like for me at that age. And I can tell you why I think that this or that would be a good move. But then I said, I'm not even sure that this is true anymore. I said to him, your generation has a wisdom that is on its own. There is a wisdom to 22-year-olds who have not had the past that I had, but who are firmly rooted in this reality, in this period in time. And then he started telling me how some of his friends were reasoning and working through the same issue. And that was so interesting. And for like, wow, like my generation never talked like this. There truly is there's a new wisdom. There's a new way of being born. And like young people know that. And then, you know, I always remind myself to do less talking and do more listening when I am with young people, because they're fantastic teachers.
Yes, absolutely. And to honor wisdom wherever it comes. Because we can use all the wisdom we can get right now, frankly. Exactly. I'll take any kind of wisdom I can get.
Exactly. I'm completely with you on that.
And I don't know if you have much to do with TikTok.
No,
I am not on TikTok. I keep saying I'm way too old for TikTok. But the so-called TikTok witches, they keep doing these shocking things. And then people my age and younger in the community are like, oh no, the TikTok witches, now, what have they done? I have to laugh, because when I was the age of the TikTok witches, when I was 18, 17, 21, we did the same stupid stuff. We hexed the moon. We pulled out Ouija boards. We did all that stuff. And it's how we learn. The craft that I practice, whether it's an herbal craft or a magical craft, it's experiential. You can't always get it from a book. Sometimes you got to go, all right, well, me and you and Barbara Jean, we're going to hex the moon tonight and see what happens. The only difference is that we didn't have 20,000 people as an audience. Exactly. And it wasn't recorded, so that 20 years from now,
Instagram or TikTok,
exactly,
going on, right?
Yeah, so bless them. They're doing what we've all done. Trial and error is the fastest way to learn just about anything.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I messed that up. I think we'll try a different technique.
Yeah, exactly. But if, you know, like making a mistake, you always get to learn something. Mistakes are
And I only learn by making mistakes, often the same mistake over and over and over.
Yeah. No, like so do I, and so do all of us, but that's how we learn. I have another question I really wanted to ask you, because at the moment I see a concept out there. A lot of people talk about, oh, we need to re-enchant the world, or, you know, the process of re-enchanting the earth. I personally do not agree with that, because I feel the enchantment is like always there. It's deeply woven into the fabric of all that is. I find it very arrogant, this notion that, oh, here we human beings are going to be re-enchanting something. So in my opinion, we need to take a more humble approach and just open ourselves to the enchantment that's all around us all of the time. I mean, what is your take on this?
Oh, I so agree with you. In fact, I've written, I think in the book that you have, I wrote about, we want to divide things up into, here's the magical piece and here's the so-called mundane piece. Yes. And I go to festivals, and on Sunday people are packing up and they're going, oh, I have to go back to mundania. Well, as long as you are thinking of the rest of your life as mundane, it will be mundane. But if you walk through a world that is enchanted by its very nature, then it changes you. And when you are changed, the world is changed. There is no mundane. Nothing is mundane.
No,
chop wood, carry water is holy. Blowing my nose is holy.
Yeah.
Drinking tea, all of it, it's all holy.
Yeah.
And when we walk through the world as people who are bestowing blessings and magic on everything around us, what do you think happens? We bestow magic and blessings on everything around us, and all that bounds back.
Exactly, it bestows blessings back. It's that reciprocity. It's relations. It's right relationship. I mean,
yes,
you know,
yes.
that's what we're talking about a little while ago. Yeah. No.
Well, I think that whole notion that I am here as the savior of magic and I'm going to re-enchant the world. It all goes back to Christianity and this whole idea of there's a savior that's going to fix everything. Well, tag, you're it, I'm it. We are the ones. And the whole Joseph Campbell's hero's journey encourages us to be kind of the lone rangers about things. Oh, well, I go on my great quest that is going to make me whatever it's going to make me. Well, your quest is stepping into the world day after day after day and seeing the magic and moving the magic. That is your job.
Yeah.
You don't need to go on a quest. Your father didn't leave his farm, and I'm sure the whole place is, and he was imbued with magic. Yeah, because he understood the soil and the plants and the birds. He understood.
I mean, life, we don't need to go on a quest because life is a quest. You know, we don't need to go on a journey. Life is a journey. Like, it's already happening. Like, you know, like the privilege is already present. So this sort of notion that like nothing would be happening if you didn't go on an amazing adventure. Well, actually, the adventure is life itself. The adventure is waking up in the morning. The privilege is to wake up in the morning and think, hey, the sun has risen another day. There's oxygen for me to breathe. I'm in a house with loved ones. I mean, all of these things are adventures and privileges. You know, it's not mundania. So
there's such a thing as carrots.
Carrots, yeah.
Carrots are magical. In our community garden here, we pulled the last of the carrots yesterday and we ate them. And it's February and these are carrots fresh from the ground.
Wonderful.
So the world, we just have to open ourselves to it and stop pretending that we're superior just because we have technology. I mean, I'm grateful for technology, but for me, it's also a kind of magic. I mean, look, you and I are actually looking at each other. We are 5 hours away, time-wise.
Across the Atlantic, there's an ocean between us.
And there's an ocean between us. When I think how long it took any of my ancestors to get from where you are, because some of my Ballard people are from Kent, which is just sort of near south and east of you. how long it took them to get from there to here.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it took a generation
Yeah.
for them not only to get across the ocean, but to get to wherever they landed in Philadelphia and to walk or ride a mule or a cow down to where I am now. So the magic is everywhere. And anyone who thinks that there is more magic now than there was 5 years ago is just simply more aware of it.
Yeah, it's a personal awareness. It's not a factual statement. It's exactly that. It's a statement of personal awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. The magic has always been there, but like, you know, do we connect to that or not? And also, I think what I have such issues with is the whole Christian concept of that human beings have dominion over it all. I see that as one of the ideas that's done so much damage, because it's created that separation. And also that idea that we can do with other beings and resources, like whatever we like. Well, actually, you know, we need to be in sacred relationship. We're in a position of stewardship and making good decisions. That's a completely different matter. So one phrase that I love, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Imagine how different the world would be if we had remained animists, and had not adopted this worldview that we are the bosses.
Yeah,
and we have a right. We have a sacred right and duty to dominate. The world would have been very different.
I completely agree with you, but I also think there is a lot of learning that we would not have done. I sometimes have to remind myself of that also. If we had all remained animists or lived like tribal peoples, it would have been much better for the world, but maybe there would have been less collective learning. That's just the thing I hold on to sometimes, where I think, why are we doing this, you know, on a collective level?
It was a thing that happened to us as humans where we replaced curiosity with fear. And at the point where we do that, then we're not so interested in what people eat as we are with their weaponry, because are they dangerous? Whether they are nation states of people or tribes of people or individual people. Our whole point is, how can you hurt me? And how can I hurt you before you hurt me?
Yeah.
And that's just heartbreaking to think that that's how so many people go into relationship. Figuring out how they can either dominate or not be hurt.
Yeah, I think that's a terrible thing. Already going out in the world feeling you have to protect yourself, or, you know, yes, we're going to be hurt during a lifetime, but that's like a given that we're going to be hurt in ways where we don't need to be hurt. But I think there's also something there about projecting fear out. We think that we need to have an army to forever defend ourselves. We're kind of placing a fear around ourselves, but not necessarily taking responsibility for how terrifying we ourselves are. You know, if you see like some of the stuff that science is doing, if you look at like cloning or nuclear weapons or you name it, there's some really frightening like manifestations of human knowledge. And I feel maybe the fear needs to stay more within ourselves, where we learn to reflect on a moral level on what are we really doing here, and the personal responsibility level if we proceed with this. You know, I believe I was reading recently, there is an embryo on file somewhere which is half human and half pig or something, or I don't know, maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but there's some really frightening stuff that's happening, because human beings are testing things to the limit. They're trying to see, can it be done scientifically? But also, like, the moment you do that, well, A, it's like really frightening, where is that going to go? But also the moment you create that, how do you deal with the responsibility of uncreating that? Because, you know, once you bring something into being, it acquires a spirit of its own. So on the spiritual level also, how are you going to then be so communicating with the spirit of what you create? So these are some questions that keep me awake at night, I have to say.
Well, and things like, there was a recent report about, they found a baby woolly mammoth in the melting permafrost, and they're pretty sure they can clone that. Well,
No,
a woolly mammoth,
they can't.
A woolly mammoth seems a fairly innocuous being to bring back, but nature chose that animal for extinction for a reason. And for us to play around with that process, it feels arrogant for one thing, but it also feels intensely dangerous to me.
And I think I was reading a book about that actually, where some, I don't know if he's a paleontologist or something, he said that you cannot actually do that. He said it is a fantasy. He says, scientifically speaking, if you wanted to sort of clone back a baby mammoth, the only way it could be done, you would have to sort of take genetic material and implant it in the fetus or the embryo of a contemporary like elephant as the closest living relative of that animal today. And then what you would end up with is you would still have an elephant that would have the external characteristics of a woolly mammoth. So it might look more like a mammoth than our elephants, but it would never be the mammoth that lived all of those years ago. That cannot be recreated. And I thought that was quite a sobering thought. And also I found it quite reassuring actually, that you can't just clone a mammoth and then what? We put it in Manhattan for a parade, or once we do it, what do we do it? And how lonely is that animal going to be? If there's only going to be one, like what kind of existence is that, you know?
Oh, and how beautiful of you to say the loneliness part, because as we are losing species like the, is it the white rhino, that there were only 2 or 3 left in captivity? They were extinct in the wild, and they stopped breeding.
Yeah.
They just stopped. And I think they stopped because what's the point? They just figured there was no point in that. And it was impossibly sad to me to think that because of things we had done, our species had done, that this other species had given up.
The will to exist on Earth.
Yeah.
For a book I was writing, I was researching like the last aurochs that like lived in Europe, and apparently the last sort of herd of aurochs lived in Poland quite a long time ago, like medieval period or something, or even I don't know if it was 13th, 14th century, I don't know. But the point then being that because also they were being shot and eaten, and at some point there were only a few left who indeed, like you say, had stopped breeding. They weren't going to breed anymore because like that species just isn't willing to be here and in relationship with human beings anymore. And then there was just one left that survived the other ones. So this was in a forest in Poland. So there were a number of more years where this lonely single oryx was just seen. There are descriptions in the historical text of how that animal would walk around by itself. It had no companions of the same species. And it just made me desperately sad. And then eventually it died. And that was the death of the last oryx in Europe. And you sort of think, you know, this is desperately sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And there is some guilt involved because it's humans that did it.
Exactly. Like, it was not necessary. It wasn't.
No.
It was an avoidable outcome.
Yes.
What can we learn from that?
And we like to think that we are more savvy now than they were then. So we would not hunt the passenger pigeon to extinction now. Certainly we wouldn't do that. We would not hunt bisons down until they were almost extinct in the wild. And yet it's not hunting that we do now, it's development. So we're perfectly happy to say there is a discrete breeding population of this one kind of newt or bird or whatever on this piece of ground, but we need housing. But I think we can get oil there, or we can dig for coal or whatever. So it's not even like we're hunting it to eat it. We are just destroying species because we're destroying their habitats, because we want the land for something else.
Yeah.
So we haven't learned anything. Not really.
No, not only that, but I think
do it differently.
Our powers of destruction are greater than ever before. It's a fairly recent thing that human beings could like take out the planet or destroy the planet. You know, until the nuclear bomb, that wouldn't have been possible. You could only do localized destruction. But it seems to me that if we're going to have that level of power, we need to reflect on the shadow of that power. And then we really need to step into the power of being in right relationship with all that we are stewards of and coexist with. You know, that's the way I see it. Yeah.
That responsibility thing, though, is so much harder than the destruction thing.
Exactly.
Come on.
Exactly.
It's really hard.
But, you know, that's what needs to be done.
Yeah, I had a friend for years and years. There's an American expression you better cut that out or I'm going to open up a can of whoop ass on you.
What does that mean? What is whoop?
Well, it means I'm going to take care of this if you don't. Well, a friend of mine and I used to say we were going to open up a can of personal responsibility on your ass so that you would be forced to deal with your actions.
Wow.
We're not good at that as a rule.
But I think it would make an exciting art installation. I could see this as someone did this as an art installation. You get these like tins, baked beans or whatever. And then instead you have the label, personal responsibility. And then you stick it in the baked beans in all the supermarkets. I mean, that would make a really good campaign, actually. That could be done.
I'm going to make one of those and send it to you. Just a little label, and you can put it on any can you want. Yeah. Baked beans.
Exactly. And then you go to the supermarket and you stop them. It's a form of activism. I could get on with that. Okay, let me see what else I have on my list. Yeah,
you are so good with the questions. Thank you.
You like them? Oh, good. I'm trying to be a good interviewer. One phrase I loved in your book, and I actually used it in my endorsement for your book, is listening to the hoofbeats of God. Can you tell us what that is?
There was a wonderful book about, 20 years ago, I guess, called Listening for the Heartbeat of God. And I think it was John Philip Newell that wrote that. And I worked in a bookstore, and so I would be walking from one part of the store to another, and I would just sort of see a title out of the corner of my eye, and it would often not be right. And that was one of them. It was, wouldn't it be fun to have a book, Listening for the Hoofbeat of God? And so I wrote about that in this book, about how we like to pigeonhole the divine as anthropomorphic. And so the divine always has to look like me. Yeah. The divine is either a goddess or a god. I mean, sometimes for the Egyptians and some other people, they were more animal natured, and maybe they'd have an animal head like Anubis, but basically they were humans with different heads. Yeah. And what happens to us when we start to rethink of the divines as these forces of nature, so that storms are the divines and four-legged animals are the divines and hoofed animals are the divines. And of course we run into trouble there too, because in Christian mythology, the hoofed divinity is the bad boy. Yeah. When you start talking about the hoofbeats of God, what does that tell you? If you're a classics person, you think, centaurs, they're wonderful. Satyrs, we love them. But if you are a medievalist, you go, hooves, horns, pointy tail, yikes.
Yeah, exactly. But in my most recent newsletter, I was writing about it called Pan, and then about the word panic, which is related to Pan, and then the word pandemic, and it's like all in there, like.
Exactly.
Yeah, but etymologically speaking, all these things are related. So kind of that whole idea of the Pan and the panic in the pandemic. So that was the theme of a newsletter. Another hoof divinity. That's why I give him a mention.
I love finding out where words come from.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a question about it. Sometimes it's not clear where the word comes from, but I love it. I love to track things back to Old Dutch. Well, it's a word from, and where was it before it was Old Dutch? We may not know.
We may not know, but like being Dutch, of course, I love hearing that you trace things back to Old Dutch. I speak contemporary Dutch, that's my mother tongue, so yeah. And also how Old Dutch, especially Frisian, is quite close to Old English. Actually, Frisian is the closest living relative in terms of languages to Old English. So lots of interesting stuff there to work with.
It is. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I find it fascinating. Like all my students know what the word etymology means, because I always take them to the root meanings. I suppose I'm a linguistic root worker. I'm always taking my students back to the root of things.
I like that. I call myself a forensic folklorist, because I go into the folklore and then I dig through and I go, okay, well, it looks like the story of a girl taking food to her grandma who encounters a wolf, but what is this really about?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love digging into that stuff and digging into the older stories. And
Yeah.
you can see sometimes a direct corollary between this story that comes out of Eastern Europe and this story that comes out of Southern Spain. And you
Yeah.
think, now, how did those two things come together? Or is it something that rose? Did they rise in two different places at different times? Because that happens too in cultures where you think, oh no, that's something in my culture. And then you find out a culture that is literally thousands of miles and maybe 1,000 years difference, that the same thing rose up. I think about the wild woman of the woods that in Eastern Europe and Russia is the Baba Yaga.
Oh yeah.
But she's everywhere. The wild woman who can't be tamed, the hag who lives wild in the woods and will steal your children and probably bake them in an oven where they will be delicious. Because I also have candy on my house. It'll be great.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff.
It's
language and culture, so fascinating and so complicated, and yet so simple, because these are just the strings that tie us together. That's all.
Yeah, and I think these strings are very much like magical necklaces, because if you follow the beads, it's like prayer beads, like eventually you've done them all and you get to the beginning. So it's like cyclical, like talking about hags. I'm a rune magician, so I work with the runes, and then you have the rune Hagel. And for me, the pregnant hag is the indwelling spirit of the Hagel rune, or Hagelas, most people would say. In Scandinavian name is Hagel, or Frisian is Hegel. But I just find that really interesting that word is also connected to the word hag, and that also the Hagel rune is the equivalent of the tower, but in the rune set. So when the Hagel rune comes up, then you're dealing with very similar like images and visions of what you were saying about the tower in the tarot deck. So it's kind of that like another sort of, for me, another set of prayer beads where you can go around an entire circle, and then you come full circle and you realize that it's like the same teaching in all of these meanings and stories, if that makes sense.
And that it's a teaching that we as humans, regardless of our culture, need to have.
Yeah.
It is a wisdom, to return to the earlier part of our conversation. It's wisdom that we need to have so that we can pass it on.
Yeah, exactly. And I love all of that stuff. I'm very much, and I love forensic folklorist. I think that's brilliant. Absolutely. This is something, maybe that's a profession. I want to acquire no more professions, but forensic folklorist, that's a profession I'd love to have.
Well, take it, because I invented it. And when the thought came into my head, I was at a conference. And so I did a Google search of forensic folklorist. Nothing came up.
Oh, wow.
But now if I do a search of forensic folklorist, I come up.
Oh.
So here is me bestowing on you a certificate that you are now also a forensic folklorist. Oh. And now there are two of us in the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm your colleague now. Oh,
I love it. Like you weren't my colleague before.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. I shall really sit with that and appreciate it.
Put it on your business card. Do you have business cards?
Not anymore. I've posted painting and stuff, but no, I think we're beyond business cards now. It's all, you give your social media handles and an email kind of thing.
Yeah. Just find me on Facebook, Twitter, Insta. Yeah.
All the social media handles. I have like one more question for you. That's my final question. I'm not going to keep you all day. And as a root worker and witch and all of those capacities you described, do you have any guidance for families, parents, and people who work with children for not only surviving but actually thriving in pandemic times? Anything for people who work with children and young people, and the way young people have been impacted by this pandemic?
Oh, well, I have two things, and one of them comes up because I was talking to a friend about it yesterday, is that we have to let children find their own route through danger, whatever that danger is perceived as, because if we make everything too soft for them, then they get anxious that they don't know how to function in the world. So finding the places where children especially can explore and fail and learn what you do with failure will really help them when they get to be 18, 19 years old and they have to face a world where you're not there to wrap them in cotton wool. Now, I'm not telling you to send your 3-year-old out in traffic, but I'm saying figure out how they can learn what it means to learn and to learn that they don't know everything, but they have access to everything they can learn. Yeah. And the other thing always is, for me, I refer everything back to nature. And I look for my answers in nature. How does nature deal with that?
Yeah.
And to adopt an animistic point of view that everything begins and ends in the natural world, whether you live in a big city or not. Because a big city, it's part of the built world, but it's still the natural world. And you can find connection with spirit, other spirit beings beyond ourselves, or with the spirit of place, or with our ancestral spirits. You can find that wherever you are. And the more connected in we are, not only with our own personal, with our species, with our tribe, with our families and our communities, the more likely we are to be able to survive where we are. Because these are perilous times, and there's no question about that. It's not just the media trying to scare us. We live in really difficult, scary times. And the more we can approach that by looking at what the earth does, what nature does, and by learning how we rely on each other the way we did 100 years ago, the way we did pre-industrial revolution, is going to be super important.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for giving that thought, because I've already said earlier that's a cause very close to my own heart. So I just wanted to put that in. So is there anything else? Do you have a question for me before I close this dialogue?
Oh, well, I wanted to ask you, you just announced on Facebook that you have worked out being able to give continuing education credits to people.
No, not give them. No, just
or they can earn them. How's that?
No, the way this works is, this is a common thing in the US. It's a US system where people have to be in ongoing education. So professionals such as therapists and social workers.
Right.
And apparently organizations that offer courses. And I know that years ago, my own teacher then, Sandra Ingeman, did that people could apply for the continued CE, continued education credit. And I'm teaching a workshop in March, which is about toolkit work with children and families, but with a pandemic focus. And I just put that on Instagram as something people could enroll in, because it's free, it's completely free of charge. And then some people in the US said it would be so great if people could do it and get a CE for it, but I have no idea how to do that. So then 2 people kindly came forward and said, we will help you do all the admin and fill it in, see if you can get that, CE status. And then it means that people could do that course, which is going to be like a shamanic toolkit kind of course, like a mini workshop. And it means that children's therapists, social workers, whoever, could attend the course and actually get a CE, so many credits for it. So it goes towards the amount of continued education they have to do in a year. So that application was filed not by me. I provided all the information, but there's someone who's very, very good at this, who does this all the time. She offered to file it for me and reword it, and she filed it late last night in the hope that that will be approved. It will get approval before the workshop runs on March 17th.
That's wonderful.
That's community as well, someone I haven't even met in person who just comes forward and says, yes, I'll spend my Sunday afternoon filling that in, because I think it's really, really important that people get that. And that if they're going to invest the time and effort, they get their CE credits for that. So
that's just marvelous, because anything that helps people connect better, or to have a wonderful reason. So I can do both, and I can do this thing that I really want to do, and I also can get a couple of hours of CE. It's just, it's really smart.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what
Thank you for doing that.
does like community as well. It's like, you know, really touched. It's like, this is someone I've not met in person. You know, I can't even say that they're friends in the sense of like people I've met in person. And yet, you know, they did this thing. They spent time on that, and the application went on the same day as the ID came up. It's been filed, it's been done. It's like, wow. I mean, this is community in action. Like, I'm deeply touched by that. But I myself cannot give out these credits. Like, you know, you have to have the approval. You know, you have to have approval.
Right.
It has to go through a system. So I cannot claim that I can personally give that out for every course I teach. For this particular course, if we get the approval, then yes, I will be able to give out these credits or sign off on them. It'd be amazing.
It is amazing. It's really terrific.
Yeah.
So congratulations and thank you.
Well, if it works, but like, yeah, thank you. No, hopefully it will. The lady who filed it said she'd never had a no yet. She considers herself an expert in sort of filing these things. So she's confident.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a major stroke of luck. And I also think it's also the way of the future. I think it's a really good thing that these courses more make it onto the, call it the buffet of options for people in more sort of mainstream professions than my own. So that social workers, therapists can do a course that is shamanic in focus, and that it still counts as real training in their own profession. I think it's an absolutely marvelous concept. So I'm absolutely thrilled about it.
Yeah, and it makes the work we do, it gives it a validity in a more mainstream world that is helpful.
Yeah.
It's helpful when we're explaining things. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. So it's good for my profession as well to sort of see that it can actually have that sort of status.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was the CE, continued education story. So, well, thank you very much, Byron. I cannot take more of your time. I think we've talked for over an hour. It's
been lovely. It's been lovely to have tea with you this morning. So I know it's afternoon there. Let's do it again sometime when we have something else fun to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be up for that. I will very much bear that in mind. So, so I may invite you back at some point if there is another.
I would love that. And we could just have a conversation as to women who love the word hag.
Yeah, women who love the word hag, and two women who are forensic folklorists.
That's right.
Yeah,
we may have to have a conference. Let's have a conference in London, shall we?
No, we could, or we could have an online conference, a bit easier to organize. For forensic folklorists, it will have at least 2 attendees.
I like it. There always is another conference, isn't there? Always.
There always is.
Well, have a lovely rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for finding the time to do it. And so for my audience, thank you for watching. Please put your comments and questions, you know, on the YouTube channel, please not on Facebook, because they just get lost there. So ideally, I'd like the comments to go on the YouTube channel so that people who go there later find the whole thread. That'd be fantastic. And I will be back soon with another very special guest. That's actually going to be my first male guest on the podcast. It takes about time for that. So that's coming. Thank you very much. I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.